half an hour before I collapsed, my partner at the time called me and said, "Are you okay?" And I said, "I am fine." And the thing is, I believed it. All I remember then is just feeling like a vortex was just opening up and swallowing me up and just getting spun around and not knowing what was going on.
Most people think that burnout is obvious, that you feel it coming, but the reality is you don't. Burnout usually starts quietly with small changes, less patience, less clarity, and less capacity, until one day, the version of you that could handle everything suddenly can't.
Burnout whispers years before it shouts. It's those little subtle changes. The part of your brain that deals with problem solving and how you manage yourself is just slowly shutting down.
This is the Optimising Human Performance Podcast, and today I'm joined by former police officer Zane McCormack, who spent years believing that he could push through anything until burnout forced everything to stop.
Looking back on it, I could see that really I was running on fumes. I had enough in the tank to come into work, do what I knew, but anything that came in that was out of the ordinary, there was just no resiliency, there was no capacity for any of that.
Zane is now a burnout prevention coach and trainer. In this episode, he reveals the early warning signs that most people miss and how it slowly changes the way that you think, perform, and relate to the people around you. Burnout isn't a weakness. It's often what happens when very capable people ignore the red flags for too long. Zane, welcome to the Optimising Human Performance Podcast. It's great to have you with us today. How are you doing?
I'm Aiden. Yeah, good to see you too, and thanks for the invite.
No worries. I know your story. We've spoken at length over a few coffees over the years, but I'd like you to start off by just explaining to the audience who you are, what you do, and really why we've invited you on today. So, Zane, over to you.
So I'm Zane McCormack. I am a burnout prevention coach and trainer, but I haven't always been a coach and trainer. So my story is I am a Kiwi. I came over to the UK about 25 years ago now, playing rugby. Ended up staying. I came over, like I say, I was 25, and then but got to about sort of 31 and switched from playing to joining the police. So I had 16 years with Devon and Cornwall Police, usual sort of policing story down there. And then about 3.5 years ago, I left. So to set up doing what I'm doing now as working around sort of preventing burnout within sort of organizations and individuals.
Thanks, Zane. I know that your policing career came to, I'm going to call it an abrupt end. I'm sure it's not quite an abrupt end. There was a process to it, but can you talk us through what happened, that transition from the police into what you do now? What led to that move?
So it wasn't quite an abrupt end, but there was an incident, early 2020, quite a memorable year for a lot of people, but for me, it was particularly memorable. So around probably a month before Boris made his big announcement in March, I had my own little issue with burnout. So the situation I had was that I collapsed on the way to work one day. Came out of absolutely nowhere. And on the back of that, I had a little bit of time off. So initially, when I had my issue, a lot of it was put down to just general stress and stuff I was seeing at work. I had a couple of roles that I had where I was, exposed to some reasonably unpleasant situations. And so for the first sort of couple of months when I was sort of recovering from that, a lot of the focus was on that. I came back into work in the middle of the pandemic. So it was, literally like one of those apocalyptic movies when you wake up and the zombies have arrived. And so I had I policed through the pandemic with that. But then what happened was a couple of months after all that sort of came to an end, I started feeling a little bit uncomfortable again, went off a second time. But this time, when I spoke to someone about what was going on, they sort of discounted, the incidences that had been looked at initially when they were talking around PTSD, CPTSD with a couple of things that happened. And really just took the long view on things, looked at what had been going on for the last 10 years. And on the back of that, we started having a conversation around burnout, which was interesting for me because it was the first time I'd heard the word. So that was sort of in August, September 2020. I came back this time with a focus on coming back from burnout, which meant that everything started clicking in regards to my recovery, to how I was operating and what I was doing. And it was after a couple of years sort of working through that and sort of understanding a few things about what had happened to me, then giving a little bit of informative advice to other police officers that had been off with similar situations, that and realizing that there was a lot of real misunderstanding about what was going on in regards to what had happened to me, how to manage it when I came back. So I eventually bit the bullet, and so like I say, I left just over 3 years ago now to set up what I'm doing now with a real focus on just lessons that I'd learnt over the last sort of 10 years, making sure that we were looking at really about preventing what happened to me, as opposed to sort of trying to treat the symptoms that that I had when everything went on.
Mm. As you mentioned, then burnout. It's not something that just happens. One day you're fine, one day you're not. You say there's various things that happened to you, and now that you're in a different place and you can reflect on those years that you spent in uniform, or maybe it was longer than that. I don't know. Maybe some things that happened even before that. When you look back now, what signs do you see? What were the early indicators? Is there anything that jumps out to you? You think, now I understand this stuff. That was clearly a warning sign. What was your experience?
Absolutely, Martin. And the one thing we talk about in this is that burnout whispers years before it shouts. And like I say, at the time, not knowing what was going on, a lot of the whispering that was starting to happen as things were building up, I was just ignoring, or not even ignoring. Was just sort of writing off. I mean, when we talk about burnout, the easiest way to describe it is either through exhaustion or overwhelm. And it's just that general sort of winding down of capacity with what you're doing. And you're absolutely right. When you look at the warning signs, because they talk about the 5 stages of burnout, when you sort of, as you move through them, things start happening. I look back on it, I could clearly sort of map out how I'd gone through it. And we talk around what was going on. We talk around just your general ability to cope with things. So we talk around your ability for problem solving. We talk around time blindness. We talk around just getting short with so that just losing that emotional ability to sort of get that sort of the easiest way to describe it, getting that sort of that reactionary gap in between between stimulus and sort of reaction to it. And so we talk about becoming a lot shorter with friends and family. And the problem I had was, sort of policing, when you're talking around sort of getting short with people. I was working with sort of coppers and villains, who were probably the two most awkward sort of groups of people out there. So you just sort of write that off for yourself, and then you talk about the physical changes that you have. I mean, around sort of either weight loss or weight gain. Trouble sleeping. I was working shifts. I was getting older. I was into my 40s. So you just start sort of writing stuff off and just sort of excusing it. But the big one though for me was just that inability to take on new skills or to really efficiently adapt to change. And the one example I use a lot is sort of 2 years before I collapsed. I applied for a specialist firearms role. And everything was fine with the assessments, going through everything, because what they're looking for really is how you deal in general policing situations, how you deal with confrontation, how you deal with sort of all that side of it, which for me was easy. It was all bread and butter, how I'd been operational for sort of 14, 15 years. So it wasn't anything new. So for me, I then ended up on a initial firearms course within the police. The first half of it was easy. I'd grown up in New Zealand. My background, I did a lot of hunting, so I was used to operating with high-powered rifles. My marksmanship was fine. So on the range, it was good fun. I mean, with the pistols, with the Glocks, with the carbines, with the shotguns, with the all the other the other sidearms that we were using. But what happened was we then moved into the slightly more sort of technical sides of in the firearms world, with the building searches, going in with dynamic searches, clearing buildings and the rest of it, and just learning those drills. And a big thing with burnout, the effects, is your ability to take on new skills. And for me, it was a 3-week part of the course, and nothing was sinking, and nothing was going in, and I just couldn't remember anything. It was I was struggling, and at the end of the 3 weeks, it was a case of you've not met the standard. This is where it finishes. And the feedback I was getting from the instructors was that they were surprised at how I was struggling. They thought with my rugby background, with my firearms background, that it'd be easy. And I was surprised as well. And it's only looking back on it then, but I could see that really I was running on fumes. I had enough in the tank to come into work, do what I knew, But when it came to, like I say, to any sort of thing that came in that was out of the ordinary, there was just no resiliency. There's no capacity for any of that. So for me, that was probably the biggest flag that I had sort of on waving. And then, but like I say, sailed on through another 2 years, applied for another couple of positions, and I'd literally the week before I collapsed, I'd been successful with another role that I'd applied for, and again it was something, it was in the in the PSU world, in the public order world, and I'd been doing that for 10 years, so all the assessments for that were fine, and I got through that, and then say I collapsed, literally got dropped on my backside quite spectacularly, and I think what it was my body was just waiting for a moment when it was safe enough to do so. I had a lot going on in my personal life, and all that had finally been resolved. And I think, and if I had sort of had anything going on, and it happens even months earlier, I would have been in a lot of trouble. And so when we talk about that, we really look at those moments. So when we talk around understanding what's going on, it is those pinch points. So we talk around when you're fine, when you think you're fine, is when everything is just rubbing along. You're waking up, you're in your patterns, you're in your with your effectively sort of emotional muscle memory, moving around the same areas, doing the same things day after day. But it's only when something gets thrown up a little bit unexpected, where we need a little bit of capacity to try and work things out, that those signs really start throwing themselves up and making themselves obvious.
I've worked with some people who've gone through burnout, and it's hard to see it. I think you can see burnout, but burning in the process is sometimes harder to see. I remember talking to a friend, a colleague of mine. We were on a Zoom call. Little did I know he was on the brink, and 2 weeks later he had a breakdown. And I remember talking to him at the time, saying, "Are you okay? Are you all right? Is everything okay?" So just making, because you could see in his face he wasn't doing that well. But I think in that moment, he clearly had those red flags that you mentioned. Yeah. He wasn't feeling great. He probably had that experience of overwhelm that you've experienced, but he clearly interpreted it in a different way. Like he didn't think I think I even remember saying to him, "How close are you to burning out?" And he just kind of fobbed me off, and he clearly interpreted that feeling as something different, something quite different.
Half an hour before I collapsed, I had my partner at the time had called me before I went to work, because I was driving to work. I was on a late shift, and she called me because she'd been quite concerned about it, so the way I've been behaving the last week or two. And she called me and said, "Are you okay?" And I said, "I am fine." And I talk about that being the 4-letter F word that we use. And the thing is, I believed it. I genuinely believed it, because we talk about burnout taking as long as it did, and you are the proverbial boiling frog. You're in there, and it's those little subtle changes. So you just get used to it. It's not like it's a massive overnight change where you wake up and all of a sudden things, you're overwhelmed. They're just tiny little incremental changes as your brain, because what's happening is that the part of your brain that deals with sort of problem solving and sort of and who you are and how you manage yourself is just slowly shutting down, because it's not having that chance to rest. So it's be like if you're using any other muscle in your body, and you're going to the gym every day, and it's max effort, max reps, and you're just not giving it a few days break between those workouts. After a while, the muscle just gets weaker and weaker and weaker until you either injure yourself or it finally sort of just stops. That's exactly the same with your brain. It just not having that opportunity to rest and to sort of sit down and regenerate, for one of the layman's term, is really what's going on there.
There's some literature in sport psychology that talks about burnout as being the dark side of motivation, and that it's like almost the extreme motivation. I think I've seen this in people that you get burnout. Well, you don't get burnout in people who don't care. Like if you're in a job that you just don't care about, it's just your job, and you've got no investment in it, you don't see people burning out from those professions. You see burnout in professions where people are really deeply ingrained in that profession, in that job. They want to keep pushing through. They want to stay there until they break, and then they don't. Is there anything in that for you? Is that something that resonates?
Absolutely. And I talk about two things. The first one being people that don't give a monkeys don't burn out, because they've got nothing to worry about. They're not leaving work worrying about doing a good job. They're not worrying about turning up every day at their best and performing, and they're just rolling in, rolling out, and that's it. But the other side of it as well is that I talk around burnout being the affliction of the strong, and it doesn't bother the meek, because in order to burn out, you have got to be able to push through a lot, and it's not something that affects people that aren't doing anything particularly sort of much going on, because in order to burn out, like I said, you'll be going through all these different stages, and you'll have stuff going on that there'll be real pinch points that you're able to push through. Whereas a lot of people, that would be enough. That's when they'd fold. That's when they'd say, actually, I'm done. And so by the time you've burnt out, the role the role you're in will mean that it can be quite spectacular.
Mm. What was the environment like at that time in your profession? Was that sort of, like you've just said, that idea of you keep pushing through? That's the culture. That's how we do it. You're in this organization that is hard, and you volunteered to be in an organization that does important things but are difficult. Does leadership and culture and the environment play into burnout? How do you deal with that sort of stuff?
It does, but one thing I point out is that in the 16 years I was policing, nothing changed. I was still dealing with the jobs I was dealing with. The workloads were the same. Everything. And we can go. We can talk around sort of workplace cultures and the rest of it. But for me, what had changed is that I had nothing away from the job to decompress with. I had quite a lot going on in my personal life. So what was happening was I was going from the emergency responding is what it is, but I also had a bit of a bin fire going on at home as well, and with stress there. So my situation was I was over here, I was on my own. That everything had gone a bit wrong, sort of 4 or 5 years earlier. I had no external support, so I was 12,000 miles away from home. I couldn't let on just how bad things were to close friends and family, because you don't want to worry people. The other thing as well, I'm 6'4" and 17 stone. So we're not at work. I was the go-to guy for everything that went on. So I couldn't sort of put my hand up and say I'm struggling, and it wasn't because I didn't feel I could. It's just that that was just who I was. So for me, the real focus is about making sure that when you have got these roles that we have that with everything going on, you've got something outside of the world to decompress from, to sort of offset the stress and the environment and what you're going on there, because it's a locus of control and all that. You can't control what's going on when you come to work and put the uniform on. You can't control the bosses, you can't control the workloads, you can't control the jobs you're being sent to, but you can control what's going on when you get home, and you can control how you're looking after yourself and how you're behaving when you're away from work, and making sure that you're intentional, understanding that the job that you do isn't normal, and that you need to be making sure that you're taking those that same sort of that same focus on the fact that the job you're doing is what it is, into how you're managing yourself and how you're behaving away from it, to offset that.
Mm. It sounds like a pressure cooker. Occasionally you just need to release the pressure valve. You need to let a bit of the pressure out every now and then. Otherwise, the thing's going to blow up.
Yeah, that's and I think
similar.
It really does, and again, it's not even about doing anything spectacular. It's just about doing the basics well, just getting your drills in and making sure that you're doing the basics every day, and not waiting for not waiting for things to start tweaking before you start sort of implementing those things. The old adage, you don't wait until the rain before you fix the roof. It's just doing that basic maintenance day in, day out, so that when the hammer does go down at work, or there is stuff going on, you've got that that base level of resilience there to cope with it.
Mm. When you look back at your experience, and now you know that you've got the importance of those recovery moments. and you look back and maybe you recognize the absence of them. Do you understand maybe what was getting in the way? Were there obstacles that were stopping you getting that rest and recovery at the time? What was your experience in the build up to burnout?
I think it was just not having an understanding of just how important it was to get everything right away from work. That you just let things roll on. The shift pattern I was on, the pattern we were running with a 6 on 4 off, which is fine for policing, but not fine for the rest of your life that runs sort of Monday to Friday. So when you talk around maintaining your social links out of the job, when you're talking around trying to run it, because I had 2 young children as well that I was trying to parent when I was off, and sometimes it'd be the middle of the week, sometimes it'd be weekends. So there was no sort of rhyme or reason to it. And it just, looking back on it, what needed to happen was I needed to be making sure I was being intentional, that an understanding that exceptional circumstances, I couldn't just expect to turn up and for it to happen. So the real focus of all the work that I do is about making sure that you are able to manage yourself, and again, not relying on the job to provide that for you. And it starts really with just understanding what it's about.
Yeah, I'd like to get into that in a bit more detail. Before we do that, you talked about your collapse, the moment where the body said enough is enough.
Yep.
And then there was a period where you then came back, right? You recovered from that, you came back into work, and then it happened again.
Yep.
Can you describe that moment initially when you collapsed? I don't know, did you wake up? Were you unconscious? Like what was going through your head? Did you immediately think, oh, this is burnout, or did
not at all.
What was the story that played through your head? Your own mind?
So the mechanism was, so like I say, driving to work, my partner at the time called me again. So I pulled over to take the call. I've still got no idea what she said. All I remember then is just feeling like a vortex was just opening up and swallowing me up, and just getting spun around, and not knowing what was going on. I then remember her being stood by the car, bearing in mind she worked 30 minutes away. I remember she got me home again. I remember calling in to saying I felt a bit of a dicky tummy, couldn't come in today, and then not sleeping at all that night, and that was and I've still got no idea about that time, but I'm looking at my diary. I was unwell for probably 10 days, and I can probably quite comfortably say I was more unwell than probably a lot of people that I sectioned as a police officer when I was working. So what I remember is then the next day calling in, she dialed the phone, put it in my hand, and called my supervisor and said, "Look, I'm actually in a bit of a pickle at the moment." Things, obviously working in the role that I did, support came in pretty quickly, and I remember then going to see a GP. I remember the GP, obviously, was just before COVID hit, so the GP was sat at the end of the surgery, just furiously washing her hands, and couldn't get me out of there fast enough, which is understandable. I then remember having trim, because obviously they were still focusing on the job that I dealt with a couple of weeks ago, so I had some trim around that. And I'm forever thankful for the guy that did that, ex-para, who'd seen my name on the list and had said, "I'll take that," and sat me down, and we had I was able to actually have an honest conversation about what was going on. I think if it had been someone a little less robust, for want of a better word, I might not have been able to be as honest. So we went through everything. I then remember being in front of an Occy health nurse. She said, "Look, Zane, I've got your trim report in front of me here. You've scored 10. And I said, "Look, what's that out of 10 out of what?" And she said, "No, 10 out of 10, Zane. You've topped out on everything. You've aced it." So, and then I remember being mute for about 30 minutes and not being able to speak. I remember her looking quite panicked about that, furiously tapping on her computer, and then getting me out. Coincidentally, I spoke to a colleague about that a few months later, about what I scored, and he was quite surprised. He said, "Well, look, I really hammed it up trying to get some time off nights, and I only managed to score 7, so I've got no idea what you told me." So I've still got no idea how that conversation went. Yeah, and then 10 days, didn't sleep, didn't eat. I was conscious of doing a lot of walking because everything was literally just probably the easiest way to describe it is when you talk around, people having sort of issues, sort of heart attacks, and they put the ECGs on, everything's sort of, spinning around and fluttering, and that's just how it felt. Nothing was settling. I remember sitting there with, racing thoughts, everything going through 1,000 miles an hour, trying to solve 100 problems. But for me, what then happened was I was walking. I was on overbridge on the M5. No issues with any sort of thoughts around that. But just remember stood there and just remembering that 6 months previous, I'd received a commendation for getting a like I say another serving para off the bridge about 6 months previous, and my colleague and I had him off. And while we got accommodation for that, it wasn't anything unusual. The patch I looked after had the M5 running through it, so I've been up on there, more than times than care to remember. But what I did do was just had this overwhelming sort of thought, just thinking that, the amount of times I've been on the bridge talking people down and talking to people in crisis, and 2:00 in bedrooms and bathrooms, and in the woods and on farms and the rest of it. Every time that person had been in crisis, when they'd hit the numbers to get help there, it'd be me that had turned up. And I just remember thinking, I am in a bit of a state at the moment, but the person that I need is already here, and that's me. And I just remember that to be the moment I sort of snapped back around and sort of wrote, well, what on earth had just happened? Still had no idea it had been 10 days. As far as what I can remember thinking, it was only 2 or 3 days since I'd the accident found me. Went home, and I just remember thinking to myself, like, I never want to have that happen to me again. I don't care what needs to be done. There's no way I'm going back to that place. I still had no idea what it was, no idea what to call it, but I just knew that I needed to be sort of finding a way through it, and that really was probably the start of it. So, yeah, like I say, I went off again, but what had happened was it was just all the inputs that we had were just focusing on those 2 jobs that I'd had that were, like I say, particularly unpleasant. But really, looking back on it, what it was is that those were the jobs. They were the final. They were the final straws. They were. My resilience levels were on, through the floor. So that whereas ordinarily I could have expected it to be unpleasant and there'd be a moment to sort of reflect on it all, but I just had no capacity to sort of understand what had gone on and everything that was happening, and the brain just couldn't make sense of it, and so it ended up eventually doing what it did.
It's fascinating, isn't it, when you think how your body and your brain shuts down and then tries to then restart itself, and how these things happen.
Yeah.
What happened next then? So you've got this period of recovery.
Yeah. Well,
tell us the rest of the story.
First thing I realised was I was starving hungry because I hadn't eaten for 10 days. And I remember sort of forcing some, a piece of toast down my throat and realising, and then, so the first thing I did was I walked home past the local Tesco and picked up a couple of massive steaks, and went home and had those because I was starving hungry. And then came back to work. But I'd just been focusing on, the PTSD, the CPTSD sort of element of it. So there was a load of focus on how I felt about, viewing what I'd viewed and experiencing what I experienced. But there was nothing working on everything else that had gone on, the last of the 10 years. So when I went off the second time, again, I got to put someone different. And I'm forever grateful that I did, because she just massively experienced psychologist. She'd been working with the emergency services for the last sort of 20 years. So I think her firm had the contracts for fire and rescue and the local police as well. So straight away she picked it up and just said, "Look, this is burnout. You're just exhausted. You've been under the pump for the last 10 years, and So then we started looking at around burnout, sort of working on a couple of things that had happened. But again, the difficulty is they say never Google your symptoms, but obviously the first thing I did when I heard that word was when it went and Googled it. But the more I looked at it, and especially the 5 stages, looking at what those stages looked and felt like, it was just all falling into place. And the big thing with it, though, what was really stood out for me, is that there was nothing big or clever about it. It was just about that I just wasn't offsetting everything else that was going on with effective rest and self-care.
Yeah. Can we go into those 5 stages? What are they? What are the stages that you just mentioned
So
there?
the first stage is your honeymoon stage, and that is, I'm not sure anyone can really pinpoint the moment when everything was running well, when nothing was an issue and zero stress in your life. But what I would say is a time in your life when you were absolutely bomb proof. You have a tough week, but nothing that a weekend off didn't sort out, and nothing much phased you. Then we talk about stage 2, when we talk about early onset of stress, when you find that actually you're getting stuck on things a few times, and if you have a tough week, and you find yourself getting a little bit irritated and not being yourself, short with people, working a little bit, but it's something that also, when we talk about being a little bit more tired, but nothing that a decent weekend or a week off doesn't sort. So, and that, what I say, would be where you need to be. So stage 2, where you can have tough weeks, you have tough months, you can have tough stuff with going on, but rest and self care, you can get yourself back to your ideal state. Stage 3 is where it gets interesting, because we talk about rest and self care being the cure for burnout, when it isn't. It's how you prevent burnout. Because once you're in stage 3, you're starting to slip into sort of long stage sort of burnout. And the big things to be watching out for with this, and this is when the whispers is getting a little bit louder, and this is when we need to be paying real attention. And the ones to watch out for are rumination and procrastination. So if all of a sudden your brain is unable to sort of work through stuff and file it away, and you find yourself sort of going over and over and over stuff more than you normally would. Some people are natural ruminators, but if it's more than you're used to, and you find yourself really getting fixated on stuff that's happened and not being able to sort of move past it, that's a real red flag. And procrastination, because all of a sudden you've not got that ability to do the hard things, because it takes a lot of emotional energy to get up and do stuff that you don't want to do, or stuff that's new. So if you start to procrastinate on stuff that you wouldn't normally do, and that's the key to it as well, stuff you wouldn't normally procrastinate on, and is there, you also start tipping into the physical symptoms as well, because you talk around the mind body, everything is linked. So when you start talking around weight, so either weight loss or gain for no particular reason, fair enough. If you've just had a bit of time off, and you've been on the bears, and the diet's gone to pot for a couple of months, and then fair enough. But, or again, if all of a sudden you start losing a bit, and for no particular reason, you've not been doing much fizz, and the weight's still coming off, then that can be a real red flag to be looking out for as well. And it's really important, because that sort of happened with me, sort of losing weight and gaining weight, and I'd put it down to age. I was into my 40s, just figured that it was just a natural part of life, but it really isn't. And then general aches and pains. Again, sort of 15 years playing rugby, just figured that the reason my shoulders and my back and my neck hurt was because what I put them through the years. Gastrointestinal things are a big thing as well. We talk around stress management with your stomach, and without getting too sort of into the details, it's about checking emotions. Loose ones occasionally are fine, but when they're loose all the time is when it's a real big thing. And like I say, I'd gone years, and looking back on that was a real, and I put it down to all the night shifts I was doing, all the disordered eating, all the coffee I drank as on working shift work. And also we start talking about, and the big one that's a real concern as well, is how you are around loved ones, around your partners, around your families, around your friends. It's when you starting to feel distant, and unable to be present. You sat there with people that you should be engaged with, and you're not. Can be difficult. And also your emotional regulation. So what'll happen is your emotional bandwidth will narrow. So you talk about stuff that would normally either excite you or scare you if you're just not bothered anymore. Stuff that, and so what that does then, it starts affecting your ability to make effective decisions operationally, because, your idea about sort of risk assessment and what's going on goes out the window, because, with stuff that you may have had there, sort of with the parameters you're in, you're not there. But I say it works both ways though. So your perception of risk and sort of danger sort of diminishes, but also your ability to to enjoy stuff, to feel joy, and with stuff, that starts narrowing a lot as well, because it does affect with your emotions. And those are the ones you really need to be thinking about, but also professional efficiency as well. So just if you're starting to miss stuff with work, especially if you've got a role that's detail orientated and you need to be on it, if you just you know aren't as careful as you were, so and it's a change in those things. And I really hammer stage 3 because at that stage is your last chance to really do something yourself, to be able to pull yourself back. Because once you're in stage 4, you lose that ability to self-regulate and to be able to, and that's when everything I spoke about becomes the norm. And you get to a point there where you're starting to run on survival mode. And your body becomes quite dysregulated. You lose the ability to rationalize, to conceptualize, but also time management as well. So time blindness is a massive thing as well. If you're missing deadlines, if your idea around, you've got to have something ready in 2 hours and you've got to have everything squared away and ready, and you're just missing those, and you're rushing and you're missing these dates and times, massive red flag. Stage 5 is habitual burnout, when this is just your new normal, when just those feelings of hopelessness are there. And I don't like to draw too much because it's a pretty unpleasant sort of place to be. But what you do is you're in a place where you just don't see a way out. And again, you have lost the ability to pull yourself back as well. So and what's needed there is just a removal from whatever it is that's causing the issue. So whether that's time off work or time away from everything you've got. And once you're there, so when we talk around stage, sort of second and third degrees, we're talking around needing help for that. And if you've already gone off, then that's when you need to be reaching out and asking for professional help, because like I say, I can't stress this enough, but you have lost the ability to make rational decisions for yourself and to take responsible decisions as well. So if I can really sort of push one point, Martin, on that, it's that you need to be reaching out.
Yeah, wise words, very wise words. If someone's listening to this, then someone sat there and thinking, you're talking about me. I'm in the beginnings of that third stage. I'm starting to snap at the kids, or I'm not playing rugby anymore, not seeing my friends anymore. They're starting to notice these things happening to me. And you say stage 3 is where you got to do something about it, right?
Yeah.
Where do we go? So what's the? Is there right, first you do this, next you do that, or is it a bit more complicated than that simple list?
It's complicated, but it's simple. The complicated bit is to stop worrying about trying to fix what's going on. So what you'll be doing is you'll be hyper focusing on whatever it is that's causing you stress, and you'll be hyper focusing on trying to fix all the the problems that you've got. So you'll just be trying to hit the nail harder, and absolutely not. What you need to be doing is you just need to be taking a massive step back and just getting that wider view on everything that's been going on. And what I talk about as I talk around the my 7 pillars that we need to be sort of focusing on. So not worrying too much about what's in front of you, but just going back into yourself and making sure that you have got everything in place. So I talk around, really, first of all, reestablishing what your why is. Understand, why are you in the role that you're doing? Why are you putting yourself through what you are? And and for me, it was a case of, I've done my time with the job, and my why was my family, and is what I'm doing, putting myself under the stress, actually to the detriment of what's going on there, because we talk around, having to put your own oxygen mask on first, and especially if you're either a supervisor or a parent, you can't afford to be tipping over. So really drilling down into your why, having a conversation about that, then having a look at your identity. And again, what I talk around with identity is making sure that that's not completely bound up in your role at work. There needs to be another part to you. And you need to be sitting down and saying, what am I? If I take the uniform off, if I stop the role I'm doing now, who am I? What am I? Is there another part to me? And it's, the analogy really is, you wouldn't give poor financial advice would be to, go all in on crypto. You've got to sort of diversify your risk and spread it. So it's about sitting down and really drilling down on who am I away from the job. Then we'll talk around how you're moving. Again, some roles are very physical. So that's not really an issue for a lot of guys and girls that are out there listening to this. But it is just about getting back to what you know and what you do, and making sure that you are moving, because obviously we understand that the rules around the better you move, the better you feel, the better you move, and getting getting back into that critical mass again, and then really drilling down into your rest, making sure that you are resting and understanding that if you're at a point where you are now, you're going to need more rest than you would normally understand. But it's also understanding that rest just isn't about your sleep. This is about being able to switch off from everything else that's going on. So being able to come away and to spend time away from your role, from your identity with that. And we talk a lot about that in regards to hobbies, just finding something to switch off from whatever it's been that's been causing you the issues. And then we look at what you're consuming. That's obviously physically, we need to making sure that you're fueling yourself properly, but it's also what you're consuming emotionally and consuming sort of in regards to the company you're keeping, conversations that you're having with people. I mean, and it's having a little bit of an audit around, every time you meet up with your mates, are you moaning about the same old thing, or are you, surrounding yourself with people that are positive with stuff? It's again, if you're the conversation you're having with your partners, with your significant others, is it just repeating the same old patterns, coming in, talking about the same old things about the, what's for dinner, well, what's going on with the kids, what's going, it's about making sure that you try and interrupt those patterns and try and look at different things to be talking about, just to sort of get a little bit of an interruption in place there. We talk around boundaries again, and a lot of that works in around sort of making sure that if we do have the job there, that we're getting those boundaries in place, so that when we're leaving, we are leaving the job behind and doing that. And how effective are they? Are you coming home still mulling over everything that's gone on, or are you able to leave your role where it belongs and be who you need to be when you're there? And the last thing is the quality of your relationships. We talk around, there's a lot of stuff on the red pill stuff, silent types and that, and that really, and if you got to a point where you're struggling, it's clearly not working, you need to be reaching out and just reestablishing healthy relationships. And I'm not talking about going into talking groups and the rest of it. It's just about being with people that like and trust. And so, and being amongst them and just being there. So not even going out and sort of making a conscious effort to talk about what's been going on, but just find those safe spaces where you can relax with people that you want to be with. So, So your recap. So the 7. So obviously you've got your why, your identity, movement, rest. You've got what you're consuming, your boundaries, and your relationships. And it's about really drilling down and looking where all the leaks are in those 7 areas and where you can make improvements.
Yeah, I like that. 7's a good number. It's easy to remember the 7 things.
Yeah.
Where does connectivity, and what I mean by that is internet use, mobile phone use, doom scrolling, that seems to be everywhere at the moment. People complain about it, but I do wonder, you mentioned things like procrastination. You meant some of the things that you talked about disconnection.
Yeah.
Is that a sign? Have you noticed in the people that you work with that they are changing their online habits? They're suddenly just immersed in social media, just watching nonsense.
Yeah.
Does that happen?
Yeah, absolutely, because it's easy, isn't it? And I know the irony is that most people are probably consuming this podcast on an electronic device. But,
Indeed.
But,
hopefully they're walking a dog or they're in the gym at the same time.
And obviously they're obviously making the right choices for their with what they're doing. But like I say, it's really easy when you're not, and when I talk about what you're consuming, it's about being intentional about what you're consuming, because if you're not intentional and you're just on there, what will happen is the algorithms will drag you down the rabbit holes, because that's what they are designed to do. They are designed to find stuff that people don't have to think about, and they will take them down those holes. We talk about negativity bias. So, a lot of work I do, I talk around the operating system that we have, Human 1.0, the same one that we had when we were living in far more sort of dangerous times. We were designed to go out and scan for risk. Anything that was slightly risky would be something that we would focus on, massive tunnel vision to make sure that it didn't kill us, because that's usually what stuff was. It was we were never top of the food chain when we back in the day. Whether that was the local sort of wildlife, or whether it was the neighbours coming over to have your stock away. What's happened is, obviously with the algorithms now, they focus on that. They know that sort of controversy sells. So it's, oh my God, what's he doing? Look at this, and I can't believe they're doing that, and that really sort of drills people down. Nice stories are nice, but they don't sort of hang on to us like they do there. But the other thing as well is with the interconnectivity we have, we're not designed to be to be hyper-connected 24/7. We're biologically designed to go out and operate in high-stress environments. Our bodies were designed to survive in those pretty hostile environments. Whether it was, like I say, whether there was issues with the neighbours, or whether it was the wildlife, or and everything else. But what it was designed to do was then to be able to go back and find somewhere safe, whether that was amongst your family group, whether it was amongst your tribe, whether it was amongst your village. Castles would develop, sort of, would come back in again, and then, the drawbridge would be raised up and everything would relax. And we were designed then to have that time with each other, to, sort of reinforce our social bonds. And by doing that, we feel safe. And when you're feeling safe and you're relaxing, that's when your levels can drop. We're also designed to be bored, which is something that we're lost as well with modern life. So we talk about rest, but we also talk about REST, which is random episodic silent thought. And that's just going out and being bored, just going for a walk, and letting everything sort of stop. And there's a reason why we get our best ideas when we're walking the dog, or we're cutting the grass, or we're just going for a walk in our own thoughts. Because what happens then is we're not processing sort of all the stuff that's coming in. Our brains get a chance to stop and sort of go into a bit of a default mode, and just start sort of all the processing in the background, everything that we've seen. And we need that time to do that, and we've lost that. So what I would say is, it's about, we talk, all this stuff online now about getting comfortable being uncomfortable, and sometimes being uncomfortable is disconnecting for a couple of hours, and just sitting with your thoughts and being bored, going for a walk without a phone. I challenge people to try that for a little while. I mean, I put a post out a little while ago, just, after New Year, just jokingly saying, I'm of an age now when 35 years ago, I think I first stepped into a gym. We didn't have mobile phones or anything like that. And I suggested maybe try leaving your phones at home. And you'd think I'd spoken about going home and punching your granny in the face with the some of the responses that I got. Just like people literally, sort of, how am I supposed to listen to my music? What about my playlist? How am I supposed to record all my, I was just like, this wasn't a serious post, but it really did illustrate just how, dependent we are on,
yeah.
Well, yeah.
Oh, I know. I'm guilty of it. I'm guilty of it as much as anyone else. I'm attached to my phone all the time. But it's funny, isn't it? I was at, I'll tell you a little story. I was at a friend's house, and they've got like a music room where they've got the turntables, these speaker systems. It's an amazing setup, and a chair. And it was like, what's this? I was at my music room. I come in here and I listen to music. That's it. And I was like, wow, that's amazing. Well, how they're saying, how do you listen to music? Well, I'm usually multitasking. I'm listening to music on my phone whilst I'm doing something.
Yep.
And so, well, you're missing the experience of listening to music. You're doing something else. And you're preaching to the converted, because I absolutely agree. I try and make it a routine where I'll walk the dog in the morning, light in my eyes, no phone. And you're right, the best ideas come at that time of day. It's something that it's a magical moment, not trying to sound too woolly or too fluffy, but it is, because the thoughts come in. You don't have to force it. You come up with ideas. It's creative. It's innovative. For me at least, it's a good place. So I agree with you wholeheartedly on that point.
Oh, and it's wild that, it's been sort of touted as some sort of radical new sort of idea. It's just how we've been for the last, it's only been the last 20 years that we've slowly sort of, had this happen.
Yeah. But like you say, people listening to this are going to they'll be in the gym, they'll be walking, so switch it off and come back later.
Yeah.
But make sure you finish the episode.
Absolutely.
Yeah. It's wise words. Can we just loop back a little bit in your story from that time? You're going through it, you're experiencing these moments of distress, of overwhelm, whatever it is that you describe it, and then there was a moment where you thought, well, there's something else here. and you're now in this job, you're a coach, you're a prevention specialist, you're helping people. Where did that moment happen? How did that idea germinate from, this is a job for me, this is a career? How did that play out for you?
It was really like a chance conversation. After I came back, I mean, we also talk a lot about post-traumatic growth as well, Martin. So what I can honestly say is that sort of 18 months after I collapsed, I was probably the healthiest and the strongest I'd been, physically as well as mentally, in probably 20 years. And so I just had that absolute clarity. And what it meant is that I was starting to have a lot of conversations with people that were either off or were struggling. People were seeking me out at work, and I was having some, quite sort of interesting conversations with people. And then just an absolute chance conversation at the barbecue one night. I was speaking to a guy who was a life coach, and I'd vaguely heard about life coaches and what they sort of did, and had no real idea. But just got chatting to him, and then at the end of the evening, he just said, "Look, with what you've everything you've explained to me, that there might be something here, maybe not the life coaching space, but certainly with what your experiences, it might be worth having a look at." And that put a little bit of a germ of an idea in my head. And yeah, sort of 6 months later, after sort of a lot of dog walking and thinking, and pulling stuff together, because I was getting to an age where maybe it was time for something else. The kids were getting to an age where shift work wasn't particularly great for their work life either, and I had to start thinking how, looking at the big picture, doing the going through the process myself around my why and my my identity, and also the other thing as well to sort of understand is that we talk around the concept, the context of burnout. We also understand that we need to keep this under constant review, because we talk around what drives us in our 20s will break us in our 40s. If we start these roles that we do, and we join up, and we're we're fit, we're no real responsibilities. We can't continue working like that for indefinitely. You need to be having little tweaks and sort of changes with what we're doing. So it was a case of actually maybe my time policing has run its course. I just got to do some pretty cool stuff. Of absolutely no regrets. And even with all the negativity around the job that goes on now, I still recommend it as a job. I had an amazing time, met some amazing people, and the skills I picked up with what I'm doing, I wouldn't be able to do what I'm doing now without that. But like I say, and then it was a case of looking into it, and I probably don't recommend this to most people. It was a case of just, I noticed it and I thought, right, burn the boats and see how I get on. But again, I'm not here to give sort of career advice, so please don't be thinking that it's been an easy sort of 3 years. But that's sort of really what I did. I thought, actually, I can't be sort of sitting here having regrets. I need to sort of like I say, just burn the boats and get on.
Yeah. Well, it's a good job you did, because I think you're helping a lot of people now doing what you're doing. Just coming back to that coaching that you do, my experience of working with people who maybe need assistance. I don't want to say they need help. They could use it. If somebody put an arm around them, or they offered them some assistance, it probably would help them. But they don't want it. They resist. And maybe it comes down to that identity that you mentioned, that some people feel like, I've been selected because I've got this way of thinking, that I will just blast through walls. Nothing will stop me. I'll persist in, that's why I'm here. So I don't need your help.
No.
Do you ever find that when you talk about those stages of burnout and you're seeing it, you're noticing, okay, I noticed that red flag. I know I've seen that red flag. And you're now there to say, look, let's talk about this, because I've been on this road and I know it's not a good place to go. How do you get past that resistance?
First of all, by making it quite clear, I'm not a therapist. I'm not here to teach you how to knit muesli and move to the woods. I'm here to, we talk around sort of sustainable, optimal performance, as opposed to sort of trying to work through any past traumas or anything like that. So really, it's about sitting down and saying, look, realistically, if you want to be, sort of running at your best, and for the next 5-10 years, this is how you need to be sort of this is what you need to be thinking about. And so I'm not here to hold hands or sort of sugarcoat anything, but no different if you went to a coach and said, look, I'm looking to complete an Ironman in 2 years' time. What do I need to be doing to get my base sort of levels of fitness up to a standard where I can go and do it. You wouldn't be going in and having soft conversations with a coach. You'd be sitting going in and saying, right, this is what I need to be doing. How do we get there? And having pretty honest, like I say, I'm 6'4", 17 stone, hex rugby playing Kiwi copper. I'm not here to sugarcoat anything. And if and I'm not for everyone with what I do. So the short answer is it is really about sitting down and is having honest conversations about where you want to be going and what's going on.
The honesty, I think, is key, isn't it? It's you are coming at it from a place of authenticity and trust and credibility because you've lived it. You can tell that story and you can show people the lived experience that you've had. I think it's powerful. I think it's something that would resonate with people for sure. I respect your time, Zane. We've been talking for a while, and I don't want to keep you for too long. So we'll start to wrap up the episode. First and foremost, a big thank you. I find it fascinating listening to you talk and hearing your experience and what you're doing. I think you've got a lot of insights, and I think you're going to help a lot of people. I know people listening to this episode will probably be calling you because there's lots of people I'm thinking of who are probably thinking, he's just talked about me for an hour or so.
Yeah.
So thank you very much. Thanks for what you do. Thanks for who you help and all the stuff you do. So much appreciated. Is there a way for people to reach you if something has resonated? People are thinking, I could really do talking to this guy, bringing you into their business. How do people reach you? And how do they learn about more of the things that you're doing?
I'm really lucky. I've got a really easy name to remember. So Zane McCormack, and it's zanemccormack.com. It's as simple as that. On all my socials, on LinkedIn, on Insta, it's Zane McCormack. So if you want to find me, just search me up. I'm not even the first one on the Google list. I'm the only one there. So yeah, nice and easy to find.
Yeah, we'll get all those in the show notes as well. It's something I've never experienced being a Jones. There's tens of thousands of Martin Joneses out there.
Yeah, no, my mum was an SEO visionary back in the 70s when she found my name. So she must have known something that nobody else did when she named
There you go.
Yeah,
there you go. What a fluke, but a lucky thing that's helped you out in your career.
Yeah,
we'll get all those in the show notes. That's absolutely fine, so people can reach you that way. You've listened to some of these episodes before. I think you know what's coming. We like to offer it back to you to close up the episode. And I always tell people, over to you, really. It can be something you've not mentioned yet. You can reinforce something you already have mentioned. Tell a story, whatever it is you want to do. How do you want to close the episode up for us?
Probably with leaving you with real easy takeaway. So people obviously, we've just spoken for an hour. So the question I get asked a lot is, how would you summarize a bit of advice to give? And I say the easiest way to be looking at it, if you are struggling and all that seems a bit much, just focus on your R&R. So if you are struggling, and we spoke about 7, but the 2 most important is the quality of your rest and the quality of your relationships. So if you have to, if the 7 just seems a bit overwhelming, and you want to try and sort something else, look at your R&R. So really nail down how well you're resting away from work and how well you're spending time with people that matter. So your rest and your relationships would be the takeaway I'd like to leave you guys with tonight.
Perfect. Easy to remember and a powerful message.
Yeah.
Awesome. Zane, thank you very much. It's been an absolute pleasure. Have a great day.
Yeah, you too, Martin. Thank you for having me.
That was Zane McCormack. What stayed with me most from this conversation is how burnout rarely arrives all at once. It builds slowly, quietly, underneath routines that often look completely normal from the outside. And for high performers especially, I think the danger is that the behaviors that we reward, like pushing through, staying switched on, carrying more responsibility, can sometimes hide the warning signs until the damage is already done. If this episode made you reflect on yourself, please don't ignore that reaction. Awareness early on can give you far more control, more options, and a far better chance of preventing things from escalating. Pay attention to the small shifts, the shifts in your energy, your patience, your clarity of thinking, your sleep, and your relationships. These signals matter more than most people realize. And if somebody came to mind while you were listening to this episode, please do share it with them. It could help them recognize something that they haven't been able to put into words yet. If you're enjoying these conversations, please do follow the Optimizing Human Performance podcast for more episodes on stress, resilience, performance, and long-term well-being.